Dead Space is full of some incredible and incredibly scary moments. Minutes after docking at the USG Ishimura, you hopelessly watch a Necromorph kill Chen from the other side of a window. Not long after, you're forced to shut off the lights in order to access a locked room in the maintenance bay. These two moments happen in the game's very first chapter, but if you ask me, the most horrific parts come just after that. The scariest part of Dead Space is the medical deck, and you make your first visit in Chapter 2, Intensive Care. Before we dive into the deep end of Dead Space's second chapter, let's dip our toes in with the basic premise of the game. I'm using footage from the 2023 version for this video, because it's an excellent remake and frankly much prettier, but the same principles apply to the 2008 original. Short version, alien zombies invade a derelict space station, and you can only kill them by cutting off their limbs. Longer version, remember the spoiler warning, the Ishimura was sent by the Church of Unitology to retrieve an artifact known as the Red Marker. This object has the power to reanimate dead tissue, causing lost members of the ship to rise again as Necromorphs. As the game explains it,
these things mold any dead tissue into a new form. One kind infects corpses, and the rest
make more corpses to infect.
Yeah, pretty nasty. The Ishimura has a variety of zones, and it's in the second chapter where we enter the medical deck. If you've seen my video on Silent Hill, you know that any medical facility, and hospitals in particular, are ripe for some good scares. Fortunately, we have our own medical expert right here.
Oh, hello everyone. We haven't spoken since I gave my opinion on Resident Evil. I am a medical expert, but I confess I don't know much about zombies. Or outer space. Or zombies from outer space. Why am I here?
I'm sure we'll find a reason, Doc. As for the rest of us, we're gonna take a careful walk through Dead Space's medical deck. As we make our way through the second chapter, we'll see just why it's so scary. It boils down to the setting itself, the moment-to-moment gameplay, and its place in the story. The medical deck is one of several stops along the spine of the Ishimura, and each one serves different functions. The bridge is the command center, the maintenance bay is the hub for physical repairs, and by this logic, the medical deck is the ship's hospital. Even here in the real world, hospitals freak a lot of people out. Nosocomophobia is a real thing.
Honestly, if you're coming to see me, you're having a bad day.
By their very nature, hospitals put you in close proximity to death and disease. If there's a mental ward, then you'll also be in the vicinity of disturbed individuals. Same deal here. Death and disease are obvious, thanks to the numerous body bags scattered across the floor and the necromorph infestation. Unwell mental patients are present here too. It doesn't take long before you come across a surviving member of the crew who is clearly seeking the release of death. On top of all that, there's an isolation factor. Depending on the situation, a real-life hospital visit can leave you stranded, left alone to rest in an empty room. Doctors and nurses can come and go, guests can pay you a visit, but ultimately, you're trapped there until your recovery is complete. In the case of Dead Space, there is no one else to keep our hero Isaac company. Outside of the occasional video call, he's alone, in the clinic of a derelict ship, floating through the void of space. Well, maybe I shouldn't say completely alone. There are adult necromorphs who want to give him big ol' hugs, and necromorph babies that clearly need better role models. Let's talk more about those nasty newborns. The baby necromorphs, aka lurkers, first show up in the Biological Prosthetics Center. Combat in Dead Space is all about cutting off their limbs, as we know, but here, the concept is being turned on its head. Losing a limb is an occupational hazard on a ship like the Ishimura, but fortunately, futuristic medical technology can make things right. Here on the medical deck, clones of crew members are being constantly grown. You can see the fetuses along this green wall. So when you lose a limb, no problem. There's a homegrown copy of your arm or leg right here, ready to go. Dead Space took the concepts of limb surgery and a maternity ward and mashed them together into one baby-filled nightmare. Someone at EA was definitely watching Trainspotting when they came up with this one.
Stop!
From a pure environmental standpoint, the medical deck is already horrifying. Of course, you have actual objectives to complete here too. You might be able to ignore the comparisons to our real-world hospitals, but you still have to actually play the game. As you take your first steps toward the medical facility, your arsenal doubles. Isaac activates kinesis on his rig suit, allowing you to push and pull objects. He also picks up the pulse rifle. These are signs that things are about to get serious. Well, more serious. We're already painfully aware of our situation at this point, considering we've done a few laps and seen a coworker die. But Chapter 2 raises the stakes, and also lets you throw them. That new kinesis ability lets you pick up certain poles and impale your enemies with them, pulling off a one-hit kill that would impress the soldiers from 300. This leads to one of the most intense early game combat encounters, where you get mobbed by a group of Necromorphs. Jump scares in a creepy setting are one thing, but fighting for your life is just as harrowing. You have to get good, as the internet says.
Please remember that getting good is not a substitute for real medical advice from your regular healthcare provider.
Your overarching goal is to blow through the makeshift barricade blocking the emergency room, so that you can find the captain's corpse on the other side. Sure, the debris is keeping you out of that area, but as our squad leader points out with a classic horror game warning, you might want to be more concerned about what could be coming from the other direction.
If they barricaded the morgue, maybe it was to keep something in.
To get there, you'll need to find two pieces of a makeshift bomb, a hydrazine canister and a shock pad. The medical deck is a series of firsts, from the kinesis powers to new enemies to the size of the area. On your way to the canister, you'll have two other first-time experiences, spacewalking and zero-gravity flying. Maybe you don't mind the bloody, unsanitary setting. Maybe the Necromorphs don't bother you. How about the void of space? Running out of oxygen is a terrifying way to go. Fetching the second component for our bomb takes us through the prosthetics lab, and you already know what sorts of horrors are awaiting for us there. The first of the baby lurkers kills a crew member on the other side of a glass window, echoing the moment we saw Chen die at the beginning of the game. We've already talked about how freaky these fetuses can be, but now that we know about using kinesis to impale our enemies, yeah, you're being asked to do some pretty gnarly stuff here if you want to survive. High on Life might have spoofed the idea of shooting a kid, but Dead Space makes it a very gritty thing. With both pieces of the bomb in place, you can blow your way through the barricade. If you're playing the remake, you'll kick off the game's first side quest inside the emergency room. This is part of what makes the medical deck so significant. The design is scary and the encounters are gruesome, but it's important to point out where we actually are in the game's overall story as that stuff is happening. Side quests are completely new to the Dead Space remake, and they're the largest part of the new content. There are only a handful of them in the game, but each one requires you to visit other decks and gives you new insight into what happened here on the Ishimura. The first one, Scientific Method, begins when you watch a hologram of Dr. Nicole Brennan and a patient. We won't go into the details of this side quest, but just remember the fact that it begins here in Chapter 2 with this hologram. It's far from the only hologram you'll encounter in the game. In fact, before entering the emergency room, you have the chance to watch one that introduces you to unitology, the mysterious cult that's secretly behind this entire expedition in the first place. Captain Matthias basically says the quiet part out loud during this recording.
Everything is about to change.
Again, I'd like you to keep that phrase in mind. What the captain says has implications for us, too. And speaking of the captain, once you make your way through the emergency room to the morgue, you'll be able to get the clearance you need from his rig suit. Surprise, surprise, he's not actually dead. Well, he was, but now he's back as a big nasty necromorph too. It's only the second chapter, and we're already being asked to fight the guy who used to run this entire ship. Just think about that for a moment. This is Chapter 2 of 12. We're here, starting to learn about what really happened aboard the Ishimura. We're fighting Captain Matthias, and there are still 10 chapters to go. The medical deck's place in the overall structure of the game has horrific implications. If this is what we're up against now, how much worse are things going to get by the end? There's a sense of dread in knowing that everything we've faced so far is just the warm-up. Kicking off the first side quest, fighting the captain, learning to impale necromorphs with stakes, taking a spacewalk, tangling with undead babies. It's all kid stuff. No pun intended.
And this is why I never went into pediatrics.
Just like Captain Matthias says,
Everything is about to change.
and that goes double for the players. Oh, and don't think you're done with the medical deck after you fight him either. You'll come back in Chapter 5, armed with new toys like the Flamethrower and the Ripper. We won't get into the details of what you encounter in Round 2 for sake of any more spoilers, but suffice it to say that there are plenty of reasons to return with more weapons.
Warning. Engine power failure.
Dead Space is a scary experience, and that applies to both the original 2008 game and the 2023 remake. There are plenty of jump scares and squirmy moments, but if you ask me, the most white-knuckle, squeeze the controller with adrenaline, terrifying stuff comes from the medical deck. By their very nature, hospitals freak people out. They're meant for healing and recovery, sure, but the flip side of that is a building full of blood, injuries, disease, and death. Add to that the isolation of space, and you're left with a sci-fi send-up of a very real fear. As you're playing through the medical ward, its specific encounters are frightening too. The intensity ramps up almost immediately with bigger groups of enemies, forcing you to learn your new kinesis powers and line gun quickly, or die trying. The same goes for learning how to spacewalk and swim through zero gravity. When you consider how early these moments occur, there's an extra level of fear to peel back. Clashing with the captain of the ship, facing down horrifying mutant clone babies, it all happens before you've completed even a quarter of the overall game. By that point, you know the Ishimura has so much more to throw at you. For these reasons, it's hard to top the medical deck for me. I'm not saying the game peaks there. There are obviously memorable moments throughout the entire thing. They say that in space, no one can hear you scream. But the medical deck is the first time the game grabs you by the shoulders and screams in your face about just how terrifying it can be.
Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. If you like what Framework is doing, definitely hit that subscribe button in the middle. It would help me out an awful lot if you do. And if you want to check out what we've already cooked up, you can hit that link on the far left. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.